time to join us today. And we want to thank Homebridge and especially Rosemary David, the chairman of the board of the Washington Mortgage Bankers, for bringing us this event. And I want to encourage you to participate. I think we all know that the benefit that we get from the Mortgage Bankers Association is meeting and talking to each other and sharing experiences. And in this virtual environment, it's a new way of, but we would like you to put your questions or thoughts in the chat box, and then Anthony will engage anybody that wants to participate. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Anthony Grast, who is with Builder Services with Homebridge. He's on a national basis working with Homebridge new construction, and Jeff Tucker with Zillow, the local, well, Zillow's economist, and they're bringing you insights and information about buyer demographics and financial behavior during COVID. So take it away, Anthony.
Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. Lisa, thank you so much. And Rosemary, thank you for asking me to be on. As Lisa had mentioned, I'm the National Sales Director for Homebridge's Builder Division, but I host a program called the Sales Lab, which is a regular podcast video program where we feature some of the top sales trainers and experts on housing in the United States, and they speak to a variety of different topics. So when the WMBA contacted me, they said, hey, do you have some content? I said, absolutely. And I know exactly who I want to have on the program, and that's Jeff Tucker from Zillow. You know, this year has been anything but normal. You can pick it from murder hornets to hurricanes to fires to an election. I mean, 2020 has been very, very challenging. And today's discussion is all about how COVID has impacted the economy, housing, technology use and adoption, and really how stay-at-home is impacting buyers today and home buying decisions. You know, this is nothing that's just for today. This is something that's here and going to continue on in the future, even though we may have shots now we can take to prevent COVID coming in the future. I think behaviorally, we are seeing a transition with buyers. And so as finance people, we wanted to bring content that was very relevant on behaviors so that we can be more proactive in our work with lenders. So today's speaker is Jeff Tucker. He's a senior economist with Zillow. I've had him on my program several times. He does incredible work on the US housing market as well as consumer behaviors. And I thought he would be the perfect one to bring online today to share with you his view, his thoughts, his research on how COVID is impacting housing. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jeff. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on. A really gracious introduction. I always love talking with Anthony. Every time we seem to get on the phone together, we end up on these long tangents talking about the housing market. There's so much to dig into this year. And so I'm thrilled to have a chance to dig into it with all of you. And I always like to hear back from actual practitioners who are out there in the field making real estate transactions happen rather than, you know, sitting at home here in West Seattle where I'm just looking at a bunch of tables and charts. But hopefully some of those have some insight for you. So I'm gonna kick it off here. I think you all can see my screen for this presentation, but sort of what I want to share is kind of a look back at what the heck just happened this year. This was an extraordinary year for the housing market. I mean, it's an extraordinary year in a lot of ways. And the way the housing market responded was actually pretty extraordinary. I don't think it should be that strange to say that this was a bit of an upside surprise, the way that housing has weathered this recession. And I'm going to dig into some of the reasons why and what that will tell us about what might happen next. So just to look back, this spike, there are so many measures where we could show how COVID broke the y-axis on different economic variables. Simplest, broadest way would be to look at the unemployment rate, spiked up over 14%, the worst since the Great Depression. It has come back down faster than any recession in history as well. This kind of stop and turn back on the economy type of recession has simply never occurred before. But this is, I think, helpful to remember while, you know, we've had a few months of good economic data, just what an extraordinary negative shock this was to the market. And the other kind of major takeaway that I've seen this year is a huge shift in consumer behavior into the online world. And I'm really not just talking my book at Zillow. This is something that we started observing early on in the crisis. And it was something I actually proposed to my team back here in March to say, just how bad is this going to get? So we were, letting executives know we're seeing double-digit percentage declines in traffic on Zillow listings. This is an early bellwether of a demand shock. And ever since then, since April, we have seen just a dramatic increase. We're talking briefly here around Memorial Day, more than 50% year-over-year growth in weekly traffic on for sale listings on Zillow. This is partially a return to home shopping, some kind of making up for lost time from the spring. We'll dig into that. But there's no way that we actually had 50% year-over-year growth in home sales. So what this tells me is that today's shoppers shifted online, and they have remained online in a major way. We're still talking, just when I ran this a couple weeks ago, 31% year-over-year growth in site traffic at Zillow. So a big takeaway here is home shoppers are trying to, I think, do more of their kind of funnel, more of their home sifting and sorting through their options online, rather than maybe taking the family around in the station wagon. I guess nowadays it's an SUV to go through 10 different open houses. So what I thought about here is that we've got this unprecedented crisis running into a housing market that held up remarkably well. Top line data that I've been looking at are on the left here. You've got newly pending sales. That's our earliest barometer on how home sales are behaving. We don't get that 1 month lag from closings that you'd see in existing home sales. We absolutely saw a trough like never before seen. A couple weeks in April, down 35, 38% year over year. Ever since then, pending sales have made up ground, so that at this point, year to date, we're basically even. These last several months of running well ahead, still running 15, 20% ahead of year ago pending sales, have made up almost all of that lost ground from sort of the missing spring sales. So we absolutely know buyers came back to the market. They have been shopping up a storm. Sellers didn't really come back in the same way. We've had a few, so on the right, that's the flow of new listings onto Zillow, for sale listings. We similarly had a 30 or 40% trough in April, and it sort of gradually recovered. And we've had some weeks where we've managed to match year ago levels of weekly listings, but never actually made up any of that ground. We've sort of just gotten back to maybe a regular flow of new listings into the market. So you put those two together of plenty of sales coming out of the inventory pool and very few new listings, or over the course of the year, cumulatively, much fewer listings coming onto the market. What does that add up to? The overall inventory, the pool of active listings in the country, has shrunk dramatically. It was actually looking like a pretty short inventory back in January and February. We had a bull market for housing. We had a shortage of what we thought of as a shortage of homes for sale back then. It has gotten so much more acute, so that now we have 37% fewer homes listed in any given week, in any given month on Zillow than we did at this time last year. So the dark blue line, that's the United States year over year change, now 37% below a year ago. And these are the top 20 metros in gray, too busy to kind of highlight them. The point is just that every single one of the top 20 metros is down year over year in terms of inventory, some more than others. I know a lot of us here are in Washington. Sorry if you're not in Western Washington, but we have data about this on our website if you want to dig into Spokane or something. But the Seattle metro area is no exception. We're still seeing about 30% fewer listings sitting on the market today, which is right there, similar to Atlanta, and a deeper shortage in inventory than even New York or Los Angeles has right now. So that's what happened this year, really, is a shortage of inventory has been the driver of most of the trends that we have seen. This news got out there. I think builders especially had their ear to the ground and picked up on this rapid reversal and this really important fact of the lack of listings very quickly over the summer. We saw very confident builders, like I said, back in January and February. So on the left, you have the housing market index reflecting home builder sentiment from NAHB. A new data point came out today, which actually I didn't have a chance to update this slide, but it jumped from 85 to 90, which is an all-time high. Actually, each of these last several months is setting a new all-time high for builder confidence. So they know that buyers are not finding what they need on the existing home market right now. They know about this shortage of inventory, so they are confident that they will find buyers for what they're selling. And
Jeff, I'm going to ask a quick question here.
Yeah.
I'll actually make a more of a comment. You talked about home builder confidence, and that's something that I'm involved with because I talk with builders. I think it's interesting. You made the comment that buyers return faster than sellers. And that you can actually see one of the reasons that the builders are so positive is they were one of the few sources of standing inventory earlier this year. And if you track their sales numbers, they actually recovered about 30 days prior to resale numbers, meaning they had the inventory they sold, but now everybody is sold out. And we're back to that dilemma, but they are feeling very positive about it because of buyer demand.
Yeah, they stepped in to fill that void more quickly than homeowners. And as you said, I think a lot of that, the inventory that builders had to sell is sold out, and now they're doing pre-sales. So if you look on the right, we saw in terms of monthly housing starts, we finally had 3 good months in a row, December, January, and February over this last winter. And then it cratered in the midst of the crisis for a couple of months and then came bouncing back over the summer. So that's builders getting back in the field and getting back to work building more homes. So the this next slide is a bit of a may trigger some nightmares or flashbacks to Econ 101 or intro micro in college. This was sort of the model we were using to think about what might actually happen back in March and April. What could happen to the housing market right now? And we saw that both supply and demand were having negative shocks. That is sort of fewer people wanting to buy fewer homes. That's what the left chart shows, and people wanting to sell fewer homes, at least back in the spring. And those two effects certainly caused fewer home sales to happen. We saw that in the pending home sales data. But the big question was sort of what would happen to prices if both buyers and sellers pulled back at the same time? They have opposing effects on price. We saw certainly once the buyers came back, this demand shock reversed itself and headed back out. Then that meant that the supply shock has essentially been the story of the year. The fewer homes being listed leads to pretty radical price increases. And that is what ended up happening because the buyers came back. We have had the most just jaw-dropping price change figures over the last several months. So on the left, you can see this is the median list price, median across all homes listed on Zillow. It got as high as 11.7% year-over-year growth this fall. That's staggering, and it shows how this was actually breaking a trend of somewhat slower, cooler, more normal growth back in 2019, which of course was somewhat driven by higher interest rates that year. On the right panel, this is the Zillow Home Value Index. We're very proud of it. It is sort of our answer to the Case-Shiller Index. It's actually built off of the Zestimate on every home in the market. So, sorry, every home in the country, rather than just homes listed for sale. So the idea is that it should be reflecting changes in the entire pool of homes, not just the ones that happen to be getting listed, because we could have a major selection bias there. What you can see there is that it is essentially going vertical at the very end. The time frame, keep in mind, the time frame is very different on these two panels. The right is all of our data going back to 1996. And so if we sort of zoom in on month over month changes in the last few months, it's really been going vertical. And so that's the sort of fundamental home values rather than simply list prices. Generally something like the Zestimate and therefore the ZHVI trails rapid changes in the market, a rapid turnaround like we've had on price growth. So it's going to take a bit longer to reflect this kind of radical change in price growth.
So Jeff, let me ask you a question on price appreciation. there's a lot of discussion about the tug of war going on between home affordability driven by low interest rates and price increases. And I'm wondering, in your estimation, have we reached that tipping point? Because in August and September, we had a couple data points that came out from the census. One was on new homes, one was on resale, that were showing a slight decline month over month of sales. Is that lack of inventory? Is it seasonality? Is it affordability? Is it all of the three? I would just welcome your thoughts on because we're at record low interest rates. And so if we're reaching an affordability change due to price increases, that's not a good situation, because if interest rates go up, it can really impact affordability.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of the story, especially in expensive coastal metro areas like Seattle, is that the interest rate drops created this extra affordability room to maneuver for a lot of buyers. It brought that monthly payment down within reach and enabled some more first-time buyers to jump into home ownership. More in a nationwide sense, or even statewide, if I think about sort of other parts of Washington outside the Seattle metro area, I don't think buyers are quite so much at the absolute limit of their budgets. And certainly nationwide, I think this is one reason we've seen markets like Indianapolis, Columbus, Cincinnati, they are doing fantastic. And I don't think, even with robust price appreciation there, I don't think that it's actually running into a point of being out of reach on a monthly basis for home buyers. But certainly in places like New York, LA, Seattle, what it mostly makes me worry about is the risk of, if interest rates begin to rise, is that going to kind of lift that ceiling out of reach again, so that some of these buyers some first-time buyers can't actually get into the market.
A good point.
Speaking of sort of getting into the market, the other major change here is that homes have been selling incredibly quickly this year, and the seasonal pattern. There's not a legend here. The dark blue line shows the over the course of a year how many days, that was actually for 2019. The yellow line is for 2020. It's showing the median days to pending for any pending listing that we encounter on Zillow that week. We have broken the traditional sort of seasonal trend here, where homes begin to sell more and more slowly as the summer drags on. You get into fall. This year, we kept bumping along sort of record fast sales, still around 12 days for the median home to go pending just last week, which is staggering to see that in the midst of what would normally be one of the slower times of year. We expect this to begin to pull upward and see a bit of that seasonal slowdown, but it would take a lot of movement to end up as slow as a typical December or January at this point. Looking ahead, this is the product of a new actual macroeconomic forecasting team on the Zillow Economic Research broader team, where we're trying to forecast the changes in home sales and home prices, and trying to incorporate information about the inventory shortage, which at this point seems likely to begin to, as you pointed out, Anthony, the lack of homes eventually is causing some people who would have bought a home last month, they just never found one, or they got outbid 4 times on 4 weekends. Those are sales that are just not happening, that would have happened if there were homes to buy. So we are expecting, say, by February, for this to kind of level out. Looking further ahead, I think there's reason to think that the inventory shortage will begin to abate. One factor in April, May, and June that we are thinking hard about is what happens to a lot of the borrowers in forbearance who got 12 months, if they extended it, up to 12 months of forbearance on paying their mortgage because they lost income due to COVID. We know there are 2 to 3 million such households out there right now. We don't know how many of them actually would be able to pay their mortgage if push came to shove, when their forbearance runs out. We don't know if the next administration might extend forbearance. Say, sure, there's 6 more months till everyone's vaccinated. Let's just extend this rather than kicking all these homeowners out on the street. Nobody really knows, but that's one reason to suspect there may be a little bit more inventory sort of shaking loose next year, which would continue to drive more home sales. And we really expect the price growth to continue as well.
So Jeff, looking at your graphs there, I was trying to just do a quick little calculation. On the one on the left on home sales, is that looking like a 5% increase year over year? Is that units, I believe, or that you're
Yeah,
measuring
so
on?
yeah, so you could sort of think of 108 as that's 8% year over year growth
Okay.
this autumn here, or going into this winter right now.
Okay. And then it looks like home prices look to be around what, 6, 7, 8% year over year on the forecast for appreciation?
Yep, and
Okay.
that's based off the home value index. So we're expecting that currently 5.5% to sort of end up, once it sort of bakes in the next few months of this appreciation, to end up closer to 7.5 or 8% appreciation year over year in early spring.
Okay.
Now, along with interest rates, we know that credit standards, lending standards have tightened up. This is in many ways a good sign for the housing market, that you all are not just giving out loans willy-nilly. I've been in the process of refinancing. It did not just happen willy-nilly myself. So I can say that these lending standards have tightened. So far, more than enough people are still sort of able to clear that gauntlet, to run that gauntlet and qualify for a mortgage. I think part of the story, which I'll get into in a second, is just that that kind of bar, if we just arrayed everyone based on their credit scores, or their profile as a borrower, homeownership has been a more exclusive club for the last several years. So that bar of just how high you need to be on that distribution remains pretty high. And that means that there are a lot of folks with good income backgrounds, good credit scores, who are still waiting in the wings, trying to become first-time buyers. The big question, it's harder for me to assess this, just how many more such people are there out there? Will there be enough to kind of sustain sales and push through that home price appreciation to buy their first home next year? That's sort of an open question. I don't want to sort of give short shrift to this. Another reason this year went so well was a really kind of record-breaking bipartisan coming together in Congress to provide support to the economy. A lot of this will be familiar to you, but we had $2 trillion in the CARES Act. There were those direct payments to households. I think that certainly helped a lot of homeowners and home buyers. And then a lot of the unemployment impact, which was really disproportionately landing on renters, was cushioned by this extra $600 a week of unemployment benefits. Later, we saw an extra $300 a week actually through an executive order this fall. So by and large, a lot of unemployed folks were able to sort of avoid disaster over these several months. There's still an open question of, as these programs expire, just how many people are going to kind of run out of savings. I think a lot of unemployed folks have been burning through their savings the last few months since that $600 a week boost expired at the end of July. And certainly a lot of businesses are beginning to shutter. It seems like a lot of small businesses are going to struggle with yet another round of closures that we're all going through now with the third wave this winter, unfortunately. And now this gets back to kind of the theory that home ownership has become this more exclusive club. Despite seeing prices rise really significantly from 2012 all the way through now, as when prices were rising, that was a market in which fewer and fewer Americans were actually homeowners for several years. So the homeownership rate actually bottomed out in 2017. And what this just says to me is that we didn't see this kind of expansion of access to homeownership that preceded the last crisis. This was an important sort of data point, frankly, for assessing the risk as we entered the crisis this year, and suggested that one of the reasons that the housing market was so resilient is just that the pool of homeowners was somewhat older, somewhat wealthier, had more cushion, had more income to fall back on. And the other really important thing was that they have fixed rate mortgages, mostly 30-year fixed rate mortgages. This shows the distribution over the last 20 years of the types of loans people have been getting. This comes from you all, actually, through a lot of data sources. But back in 2005, adjustable rate mortgages were close to half of all mortgages. And fixed rate mortgages, 30 or 15 years, were just barely more than half of all. For the last several years, it's the only game in town. You probably all know that as well. but it is virtually only fixed rate 30 and 15-year mortgages, which means that we didn't have this time bomb waiting to go off. As people either failed to increase their income or they got laid off this year, they didn't see those mortgage payments explode or balloon with the big reset. There were folks who had interest rates resetting 200 basis points up back in 2005 and 2006. Not a risk this time. Everyone has that predictable fixed payment that we know they can afford. The other sort of precondition for why this all went so well was really that we just didn't have that much inventory to start with, unlike in the mid 2000s. And there was a consequence on the left of really underbuilding since 2008. I think there are arguments to be made that we had a few years of overbuilding homes in the early 2000s, but we vastly overcorrected for that in terms of this trough of missing several million homes that would have been built in the last 12 years under normal conditions. And as a consequence, the housing market has really just gotten tighter and tighter. The inventory was already, getting this from NAR here, that they're able to go back a bit further on existing inventory than Zillow is. We don't mind using their data, but we're able to see that there was already a pretty tight market coming into this crisis. And therefore, we didn't just see all this inventory piling up, and especially foreclosures piling up. All right, so thinking ahead and thinking of what has changed in the market this year, we've had a chance to see some of the adaptation at Zillow. We've also had a chance to assess some very popular theories out there of how consumers are changing their behavior, tried to find the truth behind some of it. One thing we've seen is a radical increase in the adoption of 3D home tours. So this is one great example of people using technology to try to substitute for some of the in-person interactions normally required in a real estate transaction. This is actually from an internal Zillow business planning document, but I've sort of masked all the actual numbers here. The gray line shows the forecast of how many 3D home tours we would see cumulatively in the course of 2020. The red line shows what actually happened, which was just a soaring number of folks taking advantage of this chance to create that 3D impression of walking through a house, seeing how it all fits together. That's one way people are able to try to interact with homes more online ahead of time.
So Jeff, with such a big usage in 3D, I mean, so COVID and the stay-at-home orders really caused, I call it a tectonic shift in technology use and adoption. We were forced to change everything, selling online. Everybody had to adopt and change. Do you think the virtual selling is here to stay in its current intensity, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think some version of it, some amount of it is here to stay. It's also a demographic shift of the more that buyers are coming from the millennial and next the Gen Z generations, they expect to be able to get a full experience, get a full amount of information about the homes they're looking at, and be able to sift through some of their options online ahead of time. I think that when people get the chance to go back to open houses, go back on guided walkthroughs of homes, a lot of people are going to take advantage of that. There are things that you can only get, things you can only smell when you walk through a house, things you can only hear from the neighbors or something when you walk through a house. But this ability to maybe rule some things out that don't fit, or flag some interesting, really good finds that might be perfect for your family via a 3D home tour, for instance, I think those are here to stay.
Yeah, I think definitely you brought up a couple things. I can just tell you from the builder front, from builders around the country, it's a major part of their business right now, and it's growing. Even buy it now, which technically isn't push the button, you own the home, but it's a more of as an expedited purchase process. For some builders now, it's as high as 10%. And so I think the big, what we've seen this year is not only the shift in technology use and adoption, but the millennials aging into home buying. And millennials are, I own two, so I can say this, but they are technology natives, right? That's what they grew up with. So they're very comfortable with this. So definitely see a stickiness. The challenge that I see is specifically on the financing side, since we're talking to lenders right now, is the builders and real estate has really changed their sites to really engage people. 3D tours, online sales consultants, search engine optimization, social media, video, all these things. But financing really has been left behind. Financing is the one section where it really isn't engaging. So if you work with somebody and have listings and are partnering with them, make sure you have some interactive content to engage people, because that's a big part of it today.
Yeah, absolutely. From a lender being able to get some data on rates, get to play around with what the monthly payments look like, and you know, I think it's a very thorny, scary thing for a lot of millennials. We've all certainly heard, like, be careful about dinging your credit by checking with different people, and it's still something a lot of folks kind of shy away from. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to be seized by lenders who are willing to move more of the process online. Certainly another thing that has changed is the number of people working from home. You can probably guess I'm doing it here right now. I have been for over 8 months since I last set foot in Russell Investment Center in downtown Seattle. We've surveyed folks, and a lot of people say that they are working from home in a room that is not a dedicated home office. And a lot of them would consider working from home if they had it as an option at least a few days a week in the future. Another interesting fact in here, I've sort of just shoehorned it in, but we have seen an amazing growth in site traffic on new construction listings in particular. And I think a lot of folks are looking for, homes that haven't been lived in before. There may be a shift to in preferences, maybe away from the open floor plan, open everything kind of design, where if multiple parents and kids, with their high school classes need private, quiet rooms to be on Zoom for their different meetings, that's an opportunity for builders to try to fill that niche and just give more options to consumers. Another sort of ongoing piece of research on which we've seen conflicting data is this question of, okay, is everyone fleeing the cities? Are the cities emptying out? We don't need to be there if all these people don't need to go to their offices anymore, why are they living there? Won't they all move to the suburbs? We haven't seen a clear shift in site search traffic toward the suburbs. If anything, it shrank a little bit, but it's generally very, very stable. It remains the majority. You can tell in all of these metro areas, the majority of our traffic goes to listings in zip codes we would consider suburban. There's a lot of sort of back and forth about this data. Part of it could be that urban areas, when we took this slice of data, had shut down more than suburban areas. It's hard to sort of predict the future right now, frankly. Another way that we have looked at this urban versus suburban question is to compare the home value index of zip codes in urban, that we consider urban versus suburban. We found through at least early summer that urban home values were still appreciating a little bit quicker than suburban ones. I think these lines may be about to cross if we were to update this, but kind of my big takeaway, or maybe the clear signal I've seen of what is really going on in the data here, is to dig into our information on inventory. And this is the clearest sort of takeaway I have, that it's not a zero-sum game, that if the suburbs have amazing sales and price appreciation, it doesn't have to mean that the urban areas have an inventory glut and have plummeting prices. No one wants to live there anymore. The reason we talk so much about first-time buyers is that they are the reason both suburbs and urban areas can be succeeding and have been succeeding by and large this year. So what this data shows is that up through October, the suburban inventory shortage has gotten much more acute than the urban one. So at our most recent data, we are looking at about 50% less inventory than this time last year in the suburbs. Meanwhile, about close to 30% drop in inventory for urban zip codes. At this point, I'm willing to sort of look at that and say, okay, this may represent a bit of a shift in demand, but as I said, it doesn't reflect the cities emptying out or being unable to find buyers for their homes. Just that an even more acute shortage in the suburbs. I think that is driven by people looking for a little bit more space and feeling a little bit less constrained by that commute. The other really important reason some people may want a bit more space, Anthony just mentioned, if you have some millennials or some Gen Z, especially kids, this is actually examining Gen Z. I took data from the current population survey to look at how many 18 to 25-year-olds are living back with their parents. So actually, this is defined as how many of those households saw a child who's 18 to 25 living with their parents. It's skyrocketed this year. This is another one of those data series. We've never seen a single year movement like this. At least 2 million more people moved back in with their parents back in April, May, and June. That has been coming back down though. It's seeming to return to normal. It's about halfway back to normal. Still about 1 million more young adults living with their parents than there were at this time last year. Again, if you know those parents were thinking about downsizing, maybe thinking about selling that suburban home, moving into a smaller condo or a townhouse, I think a lot of people have put that plan on hold. Maybe because you know their basement is full again with their 20-year-old kids. So stepping back and just thinking about how many people are in these age ranges, this was my kind of guide for what I thought would be most important this year and really in the next 5 years in the housing market, is this demographic wave of young adults, critically between those age ranges of 26 to 35. The tipping point, or sort of the median age at which someone in America gets their own place, is actually 26, which is a few years later, several years later than it was a generation ago. And the median age of first-time buyers in our data is 34. So if we think of this kind of decade of age range, 26 to 35, those are really your kind of potential first-time buyers in the next few years, or that will constitute the majority of them. And there are 5 million more people in that age range that I've highlighted here, the yellow ages, than there were 10 years ago. So if you sort of highlight, this is sort of older millennials and younger Gen X folks. There were 10 million fewer people in this critical 26 to 35 age range 10 years ago. And that's about 12%. So this is 46 million versus 41 million people. That is really critical. That's just a whole lot more first-time buyers coming into the market. We've also sort of, when we take a look at who today's new construction home buyers are, this is actually sort of jumping a bit into Anthony's territory of, in particular, who's buying new construction. It's also millennials. A lot of people may be under this misconception that it's mostly older folks, maybe baby boomers, maybe Gen X. By far, the largest age group at this point is millennials, ages 25 to 39. And a really critical thing to know about them is the vast majority are financing. They're paying for their new homes with a mortgage. And I believe, Anthony, yeah, you had some insight about this as well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is all really good intel. Thanks, Jeff. I did that. So one of the hard things is, when you're looking at the population, and the Zillow's report came out in 2019, they said 41% of new home buyers are millennials. Well, I took that as, it's really all home buyers. And I'm like, are they really buying homes? And this is a question that we said from the lending side. And then as you went into the detail here, 94% of them finance their purchase. And when you start digging into the data, they are a major buying cohort. And the interesting thing about the millennials, and we don't have a slide for this, but one of the things the study had shown is that the millennials tend to buy 42% of the time, they buy above their budget. Well, what does that mean? It means they buy a more expensive home, or if they're buying new, they're upgrading a home. 31% of them tend to purchase at the list price. So that is huge. That's a big chunk. That's 73% buy at or above. And if 94% are financing, they're highly reliant on financing and affordability for their purchases that they're doing. So we wanted to go in and look and kind of validate, are we seeing this in the data? And what Jeff's going to show you on the next slide is I went back in to the most recent 3,000 new home purchases, not new homes, excuse me, all home purchases, resale and new, in our data at Homebridge. And I said, what do our buyers look like? And look what we saw. And I think this is a really fair sample of what the demographics are of buyers in Washington State. 54%. Again, we had over 3,000 purchases as our sample. 54% were millennials, by and large, the largest buying population, which actually blew me away because I wasn't expecting to see that much. I was expecting to see more boomers, more Gen X, and that's not what I was seeing. We were seeing a lot more millennials, But what does stand out is they have good credit, 735. Now this is statewide, and they average about 15% down. Why this is important is because millennials for many years were thought to not be home buyers. And what has come forward now is that they delayed home buying for education. So we're seeing in our data, Jeff, you mentioned 34 years was your age. I'm seeing roughly 33 in our age coming out of our data. What we're seeing is they have great income, they have great credit, but they do have less money down, but they're buying homes just a little later than maybe the generation before, but definitely they're aging in. So I also did on the next slide here, I took a look at, just to show you some variation, I took a look at the Seattle market based on types of applications we're getting for purchases, again, for resale and for new, all over the east side in Seattle, north, south, covers the metro, so Snohomish down to Pierce. We saw, again, 58% were millennials, 15% down. The credit score actually went up on the west side, which is amazing. That's a really good credit score. And they are buying homes on average around 623. So just to give you some perspective on what we're seeing in our data from a lender perspective, for those of you, everybody here who's doing loans, you know, if this is the buyer cohort going forward, and this is the group that we're going to be catering to, one, they use technology. So we have to be able to integrate technology into everything we do with them, whether it's video communication or otherwise. But most importantly, they have a tendency to leverage. So financing is super critical. So if you're working with them now, they are susceptible to interest rate increases. So make sure you're using your lock-in shops, make sure you're using your extended locks. Also, if there is a shift in the market, and there will be at some point in time, we don't know when, but when that does occur, affordability and payment will be vitally important. So, you know, asking for seller credits, creating payments that create much more affordability and purchasing power will be very important to those buyers. So I just wanted to give that input as Jeff finishes up a couple more topics, but that was an important part about digging into the demographic.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I was so struck by this data. Fantastic credit scores and really, I mean, amazingly expensive homes that millennials are able to buy in the Seattle metro area. And as Anthony said, that's being enabled by these incredibly low mortgage rates. So that's really critical for folks to actually afford to try and get into this very hot market in the Seattle metro area. I've just got a couple, before we wrap up, I do just want to sort of give a little attention to the rental market. It's something we also track on the Zillow economic research team. And there has been a sharply different story. We've seen one of the biggest divergences in outcomes for purchase and rental markets really ever in kind of the modern era, where rent growth, and so that's the month over month rent growth on the top in our repeat rent index, has bottomed out, actually fallen in many markets, and nationwide, it's basically flatlined. Partially, you know, part of the story maybe behind this is that unlike the single family market, the multifamily market saw pretty healthy construction in the 2010s. I think it was builders responding to this record large millennial generation coming through, a lot of them living in cities looking for places to rent. So there's a bit of sort of a timing thing here where now there's a solid amount of inventory among rentals. Meanwhile, this recession, I don't have a chart showing this, but this recession has landed so much harder on people who tend to rent their homes. The census has this new household pulse survey. They find that renters are much more likely than homeowners to report having lost income due to the pandemic. And when you stratify by income, the top third of wage earners or income earners in the country have entirely recovered their job losses from back in the spring, while there are different estimates for the bottom third of wage earners, somewhere like 10 to 20% fewer jobs than they had back in February. So this recession is still hurting really badly for a lot of people. The unusual thing in the housing market is that it's really disproportionately hurting folks who tend to rent their homes. That will be relevant for the purchase market to the extent that a lot of these folks are getting knocked out of the running to go and buy their first home. They may have been saving up this coming into 2020, hoping to buy that first home. Now they're kind of knocked out of the running. The one sort of impact of that is actually that when revisited how rental listings on Zillow are performing in terms of site traffic. I found that we had that big dip and a bounce back in the summer, but the kind of year-over-year growth has been nothing like the purchase side of the market. So I do think, so at this point, it's only 9.5% higher than a year ago versus well over 30% growth for purchase listings on Zillow. Again, I think a big part of the story here is a lot of renters thinking of taking this opportunity, maybe pulling that first home purchase decision forward in time a couple of years, motivated by record low mortgage rates, motivated by the need for more space, motivated by a lack of that need for that short commute. Whatever it is, a lot of renters are kind of trying to take this chance to move into buying. It's causing this really just unprecedented push of demand against a really limited amount of inventory in the market. That is what we have sort of taken away from this year. And we are active every week, publishing new research briefs, trying to answer some of these questions, things that have struck us as interesting to research in the midst of the pandemic. We're still really curious what the long run impact will be, not just of the pandemic, but particularly of the rise of remote work. Here at Zillow, they told me I'm a remote worker now. I'm never going back to a desk at Russell Investment Center. I need to go in sometime and pack up my old desk actually, but these kinds of changes, like they only told us that maybe a month ago. So a lot of these changes have not yet really filtered out into the housing market of people making decisions based on them. So what impacts will that have? And we're also curious, Anthony is worried about this as well. Will a lot of millennials suddenly not quite get into homeownership because of these price increases, because of the lack of available homes? Hopefully, we know builders are hard at work trying to build more homes, but there is this persistent lack of listings of existing homes out there right now. And we're curious sort of how are the household finances, especially of renters right now, going to shake out? How much have they kind of gotten burned by this year of a lack of income? So that is what I've got to share with you all. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks for coming in on this afternoon. If we have time, happy to open it up for questions. And a couple easy to remember URLs there to check out that I wanted to plug: Zillow.com/research and Zillow.com/data. That's where my team posts our research briefs, including a weekly and a monthly market report. So you can find an interactive tableau, really, of a lot of the charts in this deck that will be updated, every week and every month. So again, thanks a lot for your attention. Thank you, Anthony and Rosemary and everyone for having me on.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you so much. This is just great intel, great information that you've shared with us. This has been a crazy year, as we've said. We've seen a major disruption, but doesn't mean it can't be good for lenders out there. There's a lot of good going on right now. There's high demand. And I think the skill set moving forward is just really identifying that buying cohort and what is the value that you can bring to them. As Jeff highlighted, and as I talked a little bit about, it's a lot of millennials that we're going to be dealing with moving forward. And, while financing is absolutely key to them, your interaction with them, creating affordability, protecting their rates, things like that are going to be very, very important. But, in January 2020, I asked Zillow on a broadcast, what's going to derail the market? And at that point in time, they said demand shock. And I'm like, well, what can affect demand? Well, anyway, 60 days later, we had COVID. This year, I'm hoping that 2021 is a very smooth and nice year for us, nice and quiet. And I'm sure we all would agree with that. But thank you guys for being on. I'd like to thank the MBA for inviting us to be here. I hope you found it informative. I think it's going to be recorded. Lisa, are we going to have a link that we're going to be sending out, or Mindy, we're going to send out a link to all the attendees with a copy of the recording?
Yes, Anthony, we have been recording this and we will forward it to all attendees. And if possible, a copy of your deck.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for having us on. Really enjoyed being here.
Thank you, guys. It was great information. I know it will be helping all different angles of our audience.
Thank you.
All righty. I'll give you back the rest of your hour, everybody. Have a good lunch. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks. See ya.